the time I finished university, I still had the punk haircut, albeit a different colour, and I was virtually unemployable. Because I couldn't talk to anyone, I couldn't socialise. I spent university saying 20 people at least twice a day to a bus conductor and not talking to anyone else. That was the mechanism that I came up with to get through this mess, to just stop everyone else from existing. But then I realised that I had things that I wanted to do. And in order to do that, I'd have to mix with other people. And I'd been, got a good zoology degree, and I understood a bit about ecology and physiology and all those other things, but I had no skills at all when it came to that. And I started making films, and that was okay, because I could be hired along with my foxy friends, and didn't go about my business, but I couldn't make any money out of it, I couldn't make any progress. So I had to get a job, and that meant getting a job on the Really Wild Show, which was a children's TV programme, which we made from 1985 through to about 1995 until 92. And it was challenging. I had to work with a team of people, and I found it really difficult. Because I'd talk over them the whole time. I'd never let them finish a sentence. What's the point? I knew what they were going to say. It's boring. It's boring listening to people who know exactly what they're going to say. So I constantly interrupted them. I never look at them. Didn't like making eye contact with people. I found it really, really difficult. In fact, there was a whole suite of things which, in a very simple and obvious way, made me incompatible. So on the back of Really Wild Show scripts, I've got a list of things which I need to do every day. And I set myself these tasks. Don't interrupt people. Listen to what they say. Pretend you're interested. And at the end of every day, I'd go back to my hotel room and I'd tick them off. Or probably not, actually. I'd cross them off because I hadn't managed it. And I kind of just drove myself to try and improve my capacity to work effectively with other people so that I could do what I wanted to do. Ultimately, what I wanted to do was meet peregrine falcons and jump out of aircraft, trying to see if I could go as fast as I could. In fact, I did. I went as fast as a peregrine falcon. I fell out of the sky at 200 miles an hour. And when we deployed the parachute, I was talking like this for quite a long time. And it kind of paid off because I've been employed making wildlife TV programmes, not full-time, but pretty much full-time since then. And about 10 years ago, I got a job on the Spring Watch sofa. I've been making the watches ever since, something I really enjoy doing. I enjoy doing it, but I don't enjoy the sofa. See, this is my sofa. And as you can see, things are a bit more camp. There's no poodles on the Spring Watch set. It's got pretty much everything going for it, but not poodles. It doesn't have the Sex Pistols and a clean t-shirt either. Nor some ghastly carpet from the 1960s. I love that carpet. It's one of my favourite things. Got it off eBay for 50 quid. Yeah, I absolutely love that carpet. But to be honest with you, I have a desire to communicate my passion and my enthusiasm, and I think I have a vocational desire to do that, and always have had, because I need other people to love the natural world as much as I do, because I need other people to help me, so that collectively we can make a difference. So I've understood that from a young age. But idealistically, I like to be in that space on my own. And one of the ways that I connect with wildlife is because of that obsessional part of my personality, is by photographing it. And I think that's what it's about. It's a kind of perverse therapy, because I don't enjoy photography, but I enjoy the challenge of it. I'm always dissatisfied and frustrated and disappointed with my photographs, but I know that if I keep trying hard, I can get better, and it gives me a very, very narrow point of focus. And that means if I'm looking down a very narrow tube, I can exclude everything else in the world. And that's the therapy, I suppose. I'm in the natural world where I feel safe and secure, where I feel comfortable, where I know that my mental and physical health is at its peak. But I'm also separating myself from anything outside of that environment by focusing on just taking pictures. And a lot of the time people think it's about taking photographs of exotic animals, Siberian tiger or cheetah running along. This is a picture of 6 cheetah cubs that I took. Everyone loves the cheetah cubs. I'm going to show you some pictures of slugs and snails in here. I want the same reaction. And of course, it's great to be able to take photographs of these sorts of things, but for me it's not just about clicking the shutter and grabbing that moment. There's far more to it than that. For me, you have to try and take a photograph that's never been taken before, try and produce something which is unique. And in order to do that, you have to work really hard, because there's loads of people with really good cameras doing lots of good things. And there's lots of people who've been doing that for a long time, so there's a great legacy of photographic work that you're up against. So for me, it's a constant challenge of trying to think of ways that I can take a picture which is different. And it's also a reflection of the way that I feel about that subject at that particular time. It's making it personal, putting that into the results so that it can be communicated to other people. So here, immersing myself in water in front of the elephants allows me to get these sorts of pictures. And I've seen some that are quite similar to that, but not similar to this. So for me, it's about thinking about what I want to do far more than actually going out there and pressing the shutter. So I thought about these elephant photographs for months, and then I went and took them in about 5 days, because I researched the spot where some idiot would allow me to get in the water in front of a bunch of very dangerous animals, and then I went and took them really quickly. So actually the sort of production of the product is quick. For me, it's the thinking stage, which is long and protracted. And more recently, I've been photographing elephants again. This is in infrared, so here I'm trying a different technique. So it looks black and white. It's a little bit odd, isn't it? Not quite black and white, and that's because it's been taken with an infrared camera, which has a different take on the black and white world, if you like. And here's a picture of some sculling across the plains there with the clouds behind. Simplicity is important for me, pattern is important for me. I need things which are really instantly accessible. Complexity, no good. I still listen to punk rock, I don't listen to Beethoven and Mozart, because I can't understand Beethoven and Mozart. I can understand some art, but I can't get that together. When I'm listening to an orchestra, I need to be able to understand how everything's working together, how all those violins and the violas, how all the various other instruments are coming together to produce that remarkable result, but I can't. And that struggle means that I struggle with that sort of music. So I'm happier with two blokes with guitars and another one with a drum kit, because I don't have to get my head around that. And it's the same when it comes to art or every other aspect of life. There's certain things which if I can shape that and control it, and I can make my world easier to live in. Because it's slightly different visually. So here's a giraffe, and here's more giraffe here. Dramatic skies, there's a leopard up a tree. So all of these pictures were opportunities. So I'm on the way somewhere, and I see a leopard up a tree, and I think, I'll go at that, give it 5 minutes, testing out my infrared camera. But what I really went to get was this photograph. And I'd always thought about this photograph. So if I like the elephants, this is what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking what I want is a muddy buffalo, head on, strong contrasty light, where I can take this symmetrical picture with these remarkable horns. I like the structure of this, it's appealing. The symmetry is really important too. So I spent most of my time on this trip ignoring all of the cheetahs and the other animals, and just hanging around a bunch of old dirty cows like this, waiting for the light to be right, moving backwards and forwards, just juggling about. So for me, it's not quite symmetrical, and it could be better, it could always be better. I point out quite a few things wrong with this photograph, but this is the mission. And once the mission is as close to accomplished as possible, then you can come home. And also I like to sort of transpose ideas from one type of photography into another. It's really simply done. So I spend a lot of my time looking at press pictures, advertisements, all these things, because I see them as a source of ideas that I might be able to combine, not necessarily copy, but combine and put into my own work. So here's a sort of classical landscape of an iceberg and a mountain. It's quite interested in the light. You've got patches and layers of dark and light here working through it. Without the shadow at the top of the mountain, this wouldn't work at all. The shadow balances that dark iceberg form in the foreground. So the construction of everything here is absolutely critical. And it just so happens that it almost came together. I don't like those few little wisps of cloud in that corner. I don't like those particularly. And there are some other parts of that I don't like. So this is easier for me because there's less there to worry about. So this is some snow blowing off the top of the mountain, and yeah, there's hardly anything there. but it's still some sort of structure, and it says something about that environment. But there's no wildlife in it, so then I can put a little bit of wildlife in it, but there's lots of wildlife. It's a messy penguin colony with about 30 animals in, all facing the wrong way, pooing on the ground, pecking one another. It's a photographic disaster zone. So the thing to do is to reduce them to spots and just put them in this geometric form. So I'm thinking about the landscape, and I'm recognising that really I'm not a landscape photographer, I'm trying to get pictures of wildlife. How can I get wildlife into that landscape, but retain that simplicity, which will still say something about this environment? And then another thing I tried was deliberately overexposing everything so that you can only look at the subject, so there's nothing else there at all. And this is a leopard seal. But I prefer this picture of the leopard seal, which is actually more like a landscape. You can't really see it's a leopard seal, but you can see it's an animal, and it's got some lovely texture and tone on its fur, because it's wet and dry on its back. So I'm thinking of turning the animals into landscapes. I'm not saying they're great photos, by the way, just telling you how my mind works. I mentioned already that symmetry is really important to me. Symmetry is really easy to live with. I often say to people, my idea of hell is living in a world without symmetry and listening to Coldplay. Symmetry is accessible. You know, I like to stand in the middle. I like everything to be simple. And so I try whenever possible, and when the opportunity arises, to take pictures which are symmetrical, because I can deal with them easily. And these sort of penguins lend themselves to that. But at the same time, you can't always have it. You've got to experiment. So here again, I've tried that overexposure, and I'm trying to turn this penguin into like an ink drawing. So here I've gone out of the day, and every picture that I took, I overexposed by 3 stops. So I set my camera to do that and didn't touch it. No matter what was happening down here, I was still stuck with it. And again, I suppose it's part of that obsession thing. I like rules. I set myself rules, tasks, and targets. And then when I'll do everything I can to meet them. If I don't meet them, I get pretty angsty. But when I do meet them, I can take them off and move to the next thing. So again, rather than go out and think, I might try a little bit of 3 stops over, and then cop out halfway through and do something normal, I don't do it. So that means I mess up a lot of pictures, I miss a lot of opportunities. But it doesn't matter, because sometimes you can get a result. So here, I went to a king penguin colony at the other end of the planet. It's really difficult to get there. There's 160,000 king penguins in it. And all I did for 3 hours was take a half-second panning shots of this colony, trying to focus on a single bird as it waddled through to get this picture. I didn't try anything else. A bit of a gamble, really, go the other end of the earth, not take a wide shot, not take telephoto portraits, all those sorts of things, but just to spend the whole day doing this. So from my point of view, I'd rather take a risk and fail than take some pictures which are not as interesting as might have been done before. So I'm always trying to experiment and try and see things in a slightly new way. And here it's about having penguins in the foreground, the sea sparkling behind, and here another slow exposure where the penguins in the background are all going one way and in the foreground the same way, and then the ones in the middle got spooked by a sea on the beach, actually they're running back up the beach, and you've got this sort of impressionist blur. But I'm doing myself a mild disservice here because I'm showing you pictures of exotic animals, tigers and elephants and penguins. And really the subjects which interest me most are those which are close to me and around my home. Because these are the subjects that I know best, I live with, I see them every day, I've grown up with them. If I photograph them and fail, I can try it again the next day without going to the Serengeti or the other end of the planet. So for me they're far more amenable and useful photographic subjects. But you've got to exercise your imagination, because if they're in everyone's back garden, and blue tits are in 92% of the UK's back garden every winter, then you've got to stretch your imagination to take a different photograph. So here, what I did to get the picture of the blue tit poking its head through the broken glass was to get a piece of glass and some sticky back plastic and some, what is that, Mr. Sheen window clean. You can see how clean my windows are by how little is left in the bottle there. And I polished the glass, I put the sticky back plastic on it, and then I put it in the middle of the kitchen floor, cleared out the poodles, and smashed it really hard with a hammer. So the glass didn't splatter everywhere because the plastic was holding it together. And then I made a little frame for it and put it just outside the kitchen window. And what you see here is a black background behind it, and the two boards on the right and left-hand side of the screen are painted white to bounce light back onto it, and the bird feeder is just on the side. So now what I've got to do is to get the blue tip, not on the feeder, but in the little hole where the glass is. And that's easy, because you can pay them peanuts. And they very rapidly come and start taking those peanuts. So all you've got to do is stand in your kitchen, listen to Bargain Hunt, Homes Under the Hammer, and then keep going out every time the peanuts have been taken away by the blue tips. And eventually, once they realise that they're getting a whole peanut, not a bit of one, out of the feeder, a whole peanut, you can start sticking those peanuts to the glass and training them to move up to the hole. Except it doesn't work for all of them. Because this idiot is on the other side of the glass. And it's pecking at the peanut for about 10 minutes. And what you see here is evolution in action. Because this bird didn't get the peanut, it's not as physically fit, it would have reduced its breeding capability, and it's probably extinct by now. Ultimately, of course, this is where I want them. And it's not long, actually, it's about 2 days before some of the blue tips start to come. Unfortunately, the first bird to learn where the peanuts were was this bird that I christened Frankentit. When you're trying to take a photograph of a common bird that you want to make it look as beautiful as possible, you don't need one that's had an infection of mites and has no feathers on its head. I did not feel sorry for the bird. I mean, it was getting lots of peanuts. I was doing the best for it. It wasn't long, however, before some of the others learned, and then I reshaped the hole. You have to worry about their feet on the glass. They're used to trampling over sharp things, and no blue tips were hurt in the making of this, and that's how I managed to get this photograph. So it was taken at home out the kitchen window. The whole thing was set up and planned and thought about. And that's the way I tend to approach my photography. I don't randomly go out with a camera on the back seat and think I might bump into something interesting, because I probably won't. Because I probably won't be able to see it, because I can only see those certain things in my world, not everyone else's. One of the things that we do see is detail. We see detail quickly and in great depth. And then we can retain that detail for a long time. It's an enormous attribute as a naturalist to be able to see things and remember them, or meet things and remember them, and be able to recall them. That's how I'm able to function when I'm on spring watch. People ask me a question, and I can remember something I read when I was 8 in a book in a library in Portswood on Saturday afternoon at about 2:30. And I remember that moment when I was reading it. So that, again, makes my condition extraordinarily abling, rather than disabling in any way. And I've been going there every year, actually, pretty much, since 1986. I've been there with plenty of my ex-partners. My current partner came once. My stepdaughter's been quite a few times, actually. She's developing a liking for the place, I can tell you. But what do I like about it? I like about the fact is that there's no one else there, which means I've got this resource to myself. So there's no competition. And one thing that we can learn from nature is that the reason that we have so many different species is that they're all trying to avoid competition with one another. They're trying to find their own niche which overlaps as little as possible with any other animal, plant, or fungal niche. So avoiding competition when you're trying to take photographs seems to be a sensible thing to do, and there are many ways you can do that, but physically is one. So if I'm going to a place where there's no one else there because it stinks and it's full of cholera and typhoid and, I don't know, soon coronavirus, then basically I can do things that other photographers can't do. I'm not saying they're necessarily be great, but at least I can be trying. So it's an old-fashioned sewage work, so the sewage is delivered in vans. It's not piped there. And these are basically just settling tanks where the process is entirely organic. And there you can see the material gushing out behind me. And it goes out into these concrete tanks. And the bacteria, hosts of other organisms all do their work and break down this great organic soup, this certain amount of filtering goes on to get rid of plastic waste and so on and so forth. The rest of it just sits there. Well, I mean, this was common practice in the UK, and we had these septic tanks. And of course, because it's such a rich organic soup, because it's so full of everything from microorganisms all the way through to invertebrate larvae, there's an enormous amount of productivity there, an enormous amount of carbon turning over. When you get large amounts of carbon turning over, you get large amounts of life. And life goes up the food chain. And so as a consequence of that, if you look carefully here at what I call, and forgive me, because I know it's a Sunday afternoon, but it's the shit line, you'll see lots of little footprints. And these are the footprints of countless wading birds that come to feed on all the life here. So this is an ideal place for me to go to where I've got an enormous abundance of birds that have to come because it's the biggest free lunch in Gambia. The birds of a certain type, wading birds. But in order to get the photographs, you've got to get down and dirty. Yep, elbow in. I've got a pair of shorts that I wear and keep wearing every day. And my mum used to say, when I was handling things that weren't sound, wash your hands. And I always used to say, I will do one day. It's still not washed, I'm still here. And I haven't caught anything from the sewage works, but if they do allow me to take these photographs of, again, one species, so there's an enormous variety of sandpipers and plovers and other wading birds in particular that come here. But the one that I'm really after is this bird, it's a thing called the black-winged stilt. And as a species, they're really successful. You find forms of them all over the world. Asia, Africa, the Americas, they're good at what they do, basically. That niche is, at this point in time, is a good stable niche. And what do they do? Well, they use this needle-point bill to pick off tiny invertebrates on the surface of the water, particularly when those invertebrates are emerging into the adult stage. So they're swimming up to the surface, they're splitting open and the adult emerges. But they're tiny. And as a consequence of that, these birds have to feed pretty much all day, which means that they are committed to feeding, which means I don't need to build a hive and lie down. They're so preoccupied with the need to eat, they'll come close to me, so I don't have to die. And also they're enormously abundant. It's a perfect subject. It's not scared of me, and there's loads of them. And there's no one else there. Just some dangerous diseases. So these are the sorts of pictures that I'm after taking, and I like, again, soft background. Of course, what I want is a bit of bokeh on that water. This picture doesn't work, as you can see, because it's got that lovely white stripe, but it ends halfway up. And I think, personally, it would be better if that out-of-focus sparkly stripe went all the way across the other side of the photograph. But even if it did, this photograph is distinctly flawed. And it's flawed because if you look beneath the bird in particular, there's another spot down here, you can see some out-of-focus green. Now, there's no other green in the photograph. You know, it's all lovely, soft, warm, pastel, muted colours. And you've got some green. Well, the green is little bits of grass that were growing out of the cracks in the concrete. And I couldn't have that. So what I did was I went back to the hotel and I got a fork. I went back to the sewage works and I dug up all the green grass out of those cracks for about 50 metres down the edge of the sewage works. But I didn't steal the fork, I took it back, don't worry. And then the following day, I took this. Now I'm not saying it's a great photo, but there's no green. See what I mean? It's that sort of obsessional nature. Every little detail is there. And to me, that green is like flashing, useless, 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 useless. Now, the birds are highly sociable. They don't normally occur in ones. But photographing animals in groups is pretty tricky because they don't work in groups. So I tried really hard here to get three of them in the same position, and have a little bit of symmetry. But it's not, I mean, look, this one's got its leg in the wrong position. The others have got their legs like that. And then this one's got its leg like that. What an idiot. And then here, the one in the middle, out of focus at the back, its beak is almost touching the back of the head on the one on the right-hand side. And that's what we call overlap. And that's unforgivable too. So I tend to stay away from groups of animals. not a herd, a shoal, or a flock person, just like the solitary animal. So here's one of the birds that's coming down the side. It's not a great photo, obviously it's not working. It gets a little bit closer, like this, and you're thinking, I'll stick with it and see what happens. And then, fortunately for me, another stilt flies in, lands alongside it, and they spook each other, just for a second or so, and they do a little bit of displaying. Now it's not perfectly symmetrical, is it? Because this one's beak on this side is 4.2 degrees lower than the one on the other side. 4.2. So it's not perfectly symmetrical, but for me, this is what I call a stock picture. Because when you obsess about things like I do, you could just go on and on and on and on and on and on. So I've got the discipline now. I think I've got to a point where I'm going to call it a day on this particular type of picture, this particular target. So this is my stock picture. I think to myself at this point, I could do better, it's not perfect, but I'm unlikely to do better in this geological time period. Opportunities to meet other animals. Not particularly orangs, actually, because this one was wiping rotten fig all over my face. And you're looking at one of the only vegans probably in Northern Ireland today that doesn't eat fruit because of the tactile nasty, you don't want to touch it type thing. So having fig wiped all over my face with that sweaty hand of the young orang was not my finest moment. This, however, was. This was an orphaned giant anteater. And you see that tongue that's looping out there. They're called edentates. They have no teeth. They have an extraordinarily long tongue, which they use to feed on termites. Those long paws that you can, claws that you can see there, which they break over the termite mound, tough. Break it open and they use their tongue. Anyway, this was one that had been orphaned. And after we finished taking this photograph, it was sticking its tongue down the top of my t-shirt, all the way down, rolling around in my navel, and licking out all the salty sweat. I love that. I mean, if you'd have told me when I was 5 years old that at a certain point I would have a giant anteater licking sweat out of my navel, wow, I'd sign on any dotted line. This fox is going a step further because I'm giving it a French kiss. And this was a very friendly fox that I knew a long time ago. It was a really important fox to me. And it would come up and it would put its little tongue, got a very rectangular tongue, foxes, quite stiff, not as floppy as a dog's. Telling you this so you don't ever have to French kiss a fox. And it would put it in, it would stick its tongue up underneath my gums after anything that had been left in there, I suppose. So I remember that was great. And that sort of contact with animals is something, again, which I've always craved. This is a wolf doing the same thing. And I don't mind that. And I let my dogs greet me, and one of their part of their greeting ceremonies, you know, they want to lick your face, and I always let them lick my face. And anything else, really. Well, it's limits. But anyway. So that contact is really important. However, on occasions it can go wrong. So a long time ago, I was working with Michaela, and we were in Ecuador, and we were making a film for the Really Wild show. And we were out in what do you call it? I suppose green space, natural park outside of Quito, the capital. So there's quite a lot of people there, but it was jungle and trails running into the jungle and so forth. And we were doing a bit of filming, and this guy came up and said, "Are you here to film the tapir?" And we said, "No." And he said, "Oh, well, it's just that there's a man here who hand-reared a tapir, and then he let it go, it's gone into the forest, got radio collar on, and he comes every afternoon and he rings the cowbell, and the tapir just comes out of the forest." And if ever for an opportunity, we thought, oh, go at this. So the following afternoon, we go back at the prescribed time, and we wait to see if the man would turn up with his cowbell. He did. And sure enough, got out of the car, we had to work with him. "Can we film you and your tapir?" "Yeah, sure, go ahead." We're thinking, this is great. So he stands in the middle of just a few, 20 metres away from the forest, starts ringing his bell really loudly, and within about 5 minutes, this tapir comes bundling out of the forest. Now, I've always liked that sort of close relationship with animals. I like smelling them, I like getting to know them that way, but they don't always, show me the same affinity. I'm not like a magnet, I'm not Dr. Dolittle for animals or anything like that. This tapir was an exception, and it came legging it out of the forest and it just came straight up to me. It ignored everyone else, and it came straight over to me. But then it wouldn't leave me alone. So I had a cuddle with the tapir like you do, I think. You had a cuddle with the tapir and all that, and then it wouldn't. And then I got back. At one point, I got in the Land Rover that we had there, and the tapir just sat outside, looking through the window. And then when I got out the driver's side door, it just ran round. This tapir just would not leave me alone at all. And it began to get a bit troublesome. And there was nothing we could do. We couldn't film it because wherever I was, the tapir was there. Anyway, and they're quite a hefty animal. It's not fully grown, but it's quite a big animal, you know. And so it's not like you can push it away. It's bulky and tough. And anyway, in the end, the tapir had other intentions. And Michaela Strachan took the photo. She's always coming to my aid when I'm in times of crisis. I'm trying not to get trodden on by the tapir because obviously I don't want to get things damaged. But the tapir, what should we say, it consummated this intercourse with quite a large volume of material. So I imagine that I will probably be the only person that will ever meet who's been raped by a tapir. And I think that's probably a very good time to end the first half. I remain optimistic that as a species, we'll get through this. I just think that if we carry on approaching it the way that we are at the moment, we'll make life very difficult for ourselves. We'll make it very uncomfortable when at this point in time, we probably, some dispute amongst the scientists, have the ability to instigate prevention rather than cure. So I'm thinking that we have an enormous amount of urgency on our hands. And when I say urgency, I mean like now. So I just read 6 books about the climate, principally written by scientists or drawing upon all of their research. And they fall into 3 bodies of work, really. So in simple terms, there's a bunch of scientists who think that we missed the opportunity in about 87, 88, not just due to the emissions and forest felling, but also due to the political context and so on and so forth. So they say, bad luck, we missed it, 87, 88, it's been beyond our control since then. There's another bunch of scientists that, for some reason, say that we missed the opportunity in the late 90s, 98. Things slipped beyond our control there. And there's the third bunch of scientists who say it's now. This is the point. What's interesting reading these books was that there were no scientists or nothing that I could find at any point that suggested that it would be okay to do it tomorrow or in 5 years' time. So, sounds to me like this is time to act. So how are we going to make sure that we can get that action happening? So I'm going to start really at fundamentals, go back a bit into the previous half. I was very fortunate, as I mentioned to you, that I had the capacity to jump over the fence at the bottom of my garden, dump my homework and run into the woods and explore them, find nests, catch grass snakes, watch foxes. My parents weren't negligent in any way, shape or form. That was the world in the early 60s and 70s. We were given the freedom to explore our environment, and we certainly weren't locked up in our bedrooms because it was thought to be safer to be exploring the internet than it was woodland like this. But that's changed, because that woodland that I showed you a photograph of is where I live, and I've been living in this one particular spot for 12 years, and every time I'm at home for 12 years, every day without fail, I would take my dogs for 2 walks in the woods. And I've seen goshawks, seen honey buzzards, seen peregrine falcons, seen lesser spotted woodpeckers, seen willow tits, lots of rare birds. But the rarest thing, because it's extinct, is the young naturalist. In 12 years of walking twice a day in those woods, whenever I've been at home, I've never seen a child, young person, exploring that environment. Not in any way, shape or form, not necessarily bird watching, but building a camp, making a den, starting a fire, shooting birds with air rifles. I don't know. Nothing. Not a single ever child. 40 years ago, there would have been kids running around in there, getting up to mischief, getting up to contact with the natural world, falling out of trees, taking a few risks on their own, where they calculated the risk, not someone else, learning a few simple lessons, learning, for them, maybe not me, how to socialise, how to live in a gang, not a nasty gang, just a bunch of kids that are playing out, figuring out who's best at this and who's best at the other. But that isn't happening anymore. Because we've imprisoned these young people and we've basically told them indirectly, that this environment is a dirty and dangerous place to be. Now cast your mind back to that hand, with the tadpoles. The tickle of tadpoles in the palm of the hand is enough to ignite a lifelong interest in the natural world. Supplement that with the taste of a newt, the sting of a wasp. And when you bite into a blackberry sometimes, you never know whether it's going to be a sweet one or a sour one. You get the sweet one, it rolls on your tongue, all that sugar explodes. And then you take the next one and it's as bitter as hell. Those sorts of experiences are formative. You can't get those off of a hard drive. You can only get those if you let kids out. And the young British naturalists, and bear in mind that we, in the UK, have the greatest richness, the greatest legacy of an interest in natural history, the greatest number of brilliant amateur naturalists, nothing amateur about their abilities. We have the best studied, the best known landscape anywhere in the world. When we speak about declines, increases, changes in distribution, we do so with the greatest authority because we have this skill set. But this skill set is aging. We used to have loads more. And what we see now is that those that we do have are actually much better because I think they have access to a better understanding of the natural world than we were able to access when we were that age. They do have an instantaneous access to information, which if they're clever, they turn into knowledge. So there are aspects of the modern world which can provide them with resources which enable them to develop that interest. And that's why I think that the naturalists that we do have that are young are better than I was at their age. Most other people of my generation were at their age. But there aren't that many of them. And why this concerns me is that it's their world tomorrow, and we have thoroughly messed it up. Not us here, but I'm going to blame all of our grandparents as well, and our great-grandparents, and our great-great-grandparents. I'm not going to take it back to the Neolithic, but we know full well that even if we just draw a line at the end of the Second World War, which is a frequently used datum point, and that is my grandmother basically, that we've neglected to care for the natural world in an appropriate way. And now we have a generation of young people who are waking up to this. Something, however, has got to motivate them. Something has got to make them want to get up, scream and shout about what we've denied them. And I wonder what that fuel is. Now, there are a couple of things. We're going to talk about one of them a bit later on, which is fear. Fear of the future. But fascination is another great fuel. It's that which compels Dara to get out of bed and write his fabulous book, which I hope he'll be selling here at next year's Science Festival. That fascination is an incredibly powerful thing. It's motivational. But there are fewer people with that fascination. We do have a fantastic youth uprising. I had the enormous pleasure yesterday afternoon of attending a panel conversation for young people here as part of the Science Festival. And what I liked about being in the audience was listening to their clear thinking, their simple, clear thinking, the way that cuts through all of the frass that we make out of life, all of the excuses that we try to evolve to prevent things from happening. So that clarity is always impressive and inspiring. But I fear that ultimately we've got to put young people back into contact with nature. And I know what you might say. You say, yeah, but they do it at school. But, I don't know what happens here, but when I see school parties in England going out, I see the kids in high-vis jackets. Now, what does high-vis say? Because I'm asked to put a high-vis jacket on if I'm changing my tyre on a French motorway. It's pretty dangerous. Or if I go onto a building site. High-vis means danger. So the first thing you're saying to all of those young people when you take them out in the woods, even if they're being properly supervised in the house, is that you're in a dangerous situation. The next thing, which is the worst thing of all, is that whenever they touch anything, a teacher, assistant, whatever, rushes over and squirts their hand with that bloody hell gel stuff. They pick up a newt, they feel it tickling like that, and then before the newt can scuttle off, someone's in there spraying that. They've got to rub their hands together because they're going to get newtitis. How many people do you know have died of newt? And what's the signal again? The signal is that the newt becomes not an object of fascination and of potential love, but it becomes a vector of some dangerous disease because it's being, debacteriated with those hand gels. This is the way that we're treating our young people. Is it any wonder that we can't count many more of them as brilliant young naturalists? So that's something that we have to address. However, what is heartening is that they are standing up, motivated by other things. And that is probably one of the greatest signs of hope that I see today. The youth climate strikes, Friday for the Future, it's happening here, the young people there talking about it yesterday, and again, with clarity, determination, it's fantastic. Their energy is effervescent. So I see that as a great sign for hope. But we haven't got much time. Our world is both melting and burning before our eyes. We're watching it on the BBC News, or the ITV News, whatever news you watch. And there's no ambiguity about the danger. Now, I put some tweets out this morning of an antagonistic nature. Wow, that's unusual. But do you know what was really shocking? Was the enormous number of replies that I got from people who essentially don't believe in climate change. I mean, there was just reams of them, most of them white blokes. And some of the white blokes were particularly aggressive, but that's okay in its way, it's just, people. But the fact that they genuinely and deeply and sincerely don't believe in climate change, that's deeply worrying. This is the top of a glacier melting down to the albedo effect. Basically, black dust lands on white snow, which means it doesn't reflect the light, which means it increases the amount of melting. And I'm not going to stand here and run through all the statistics about mountain glaciers and increasing temperatures because you don't need them, you've got them. They're in the news every day. They're not hidden in scientific journals anymore. They haven't been hidden there for 20 years. They've been in our hands. All that data generated by independent, impartial research has been at our fingertips and in front of our eyes. And we pick upon iconic species like this, the polar bear, melting on its last melting iceberg. And we know full well the potential harm that we're doing these animals. And we witnessed it, but we've just carried on. And we are involved. This is a view looking down on Amazonia. What you can see, the green patches here, are pristine, prime rainforests. You don't know how old, it's an argument about how long it's been there. 500 years at least. It's the richest repository of life, terrestrial life on Earth, the greatest density and diversity of species. The yellow bits are soy plantations. And the soy that's being grown here, 80% of it is shipped to China to feed pigs because of the burgeoning demand for meat from the Chinese population. So we are felling the lungs of the world, we're burning them, exacerbating the release of CO2 into the atmosphere. We're then harvesting soy for a maximum of 5 or 6 years before the soil is damaged beyond repair. And we're selling that to the Chinese so that they can eat pigs. Now when you put it all together, it's simply insane, and yet it carries on. I went to Brazil a couple of years ago, and I stood on an 800,000 hectare soy farm, which 20 years before would have been not rainforest, but a different type of Brazilian forest, filled full of jaguars and all of those other animals, all of those specialists, things like sloths or sloths. And the reason we've got so many different species in these environments is that they've been there a long time, therefore they're relatively stable. There's an enormous turnover of energy down to the fact that it's raining a lot, what it used to be, that it's constantly hot, you've got lots of sunshine. It's the easiest place to live on Earth, really. So everything is trying to live there, and that's why you've got those little narrow niches and everything's packed in. You've got these specialists like this. And now again, all of these sort of iconic animals like jaguars that are put on t-shirts and posters and go on about, things like giant otter. But the truth is that all over the world, whether it's at land or at sea, we are at war with our wildlife. There's no other way of describing it. We show it a conspicuous lack of respect, and we continue to abuse it at our peril. Now, when you watch the news and you see, 300 football fields of rainforest coming down in Indonesia every day, it's easy to think that all of the trouble is over there and everything's not quite so bad here. But we'd be a bit cheeky to talk about deforestation too loudly in the UK. I don't have the figures for Northern Ireland, but on mainland UK, there is only 13% forest cover, as opposed to an average of 30% for the rest of Western Europe. France, for instance, has 37% forest cover. So our landscape, so I don't have figures for here, is pretty much denuded. And of the 13% we got, nearly, 46% of that is conifer, and 50% of the conifers are in Scotland, and 40% of those are under 40 years old, which suggests that they're probably non-natives, Corsican, Sitka spruce, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying is, of the forests that we have got, a significant percentage of them are non-native plantations. That's not great forest, as we know. So we can't sit here and wag our finger at the Indonesians and the Brazilians and talk about deforestation until we sort things out in our own backyard. And when it comes to the war on wildlife, it's exactly the same. This is the largest terrestrial predator that we have left in the UK. Okay, you might argue that badgers are a little bit heavier. I would argue that they're a bit more omnivorous and not quite as carnivorous as the fox. But the fox weighs between 5 and 8 kilograms, which is less than the weight of my poodle puppies. We still demonise them. We still print stories in tabloid newspapers about them attacking babies. We still think it's perfectly reasonable to kill foxes in huge numbers because they attack our chickens. Well, I've had chickens for 12 years, lost 2 to foxes. One because the gardener streamed through the electric fence once, and the other time because I let the battery go flat. You put your chickens away every night, and you put up an electric fence for £100, you don't lose any to foxes. So what's the justification to carry on killing them like it's the Middle Ages when there was no ability to protect those animals? Why are we so lazy in that we think that we can just carry on killing things because it's a habit, a tradition? But if traditions don't have contemporary relevance, to my mind, they didn't ought to be there. And then we also, at the beginning of the 21st century, are still chasing foxes around on horseback with packs of dogs, taking enjoyment through watching them get ripped to pieces. Just let that sink in a minute. This is the beginning of the 21st century. Think of everything that we've achieved, everything that we are achieving, everything that we're capable of, everything that we ought to be doing. And yet we, collectively, still entertain the idea that this is somehow okay, because it continues. And if we didn't think it was okay, it would have stopped. It's not okay. It's far from okay. Those days where we can needlessly kill wildlife for fun, when there is so little wildlife left, and that there is left is struggling so hard to survive, have gone. I see someone's put a leaflet up here from the League Against Cruel Sports, and I would urge you to take these leaflets if they're available. The League are doing a great job at reinventing themselves after a period of turmoil, and they are going to be addressing the hunting issues. This is about hares, but they're obviously on the fox hunting case as well. But that sort of barbaric cruelty can no longer be tolerated. However, we do have problems with our wildlife. This is fallow deer. Where I live, fallow deer are damaging the environment. There are so many fallow deer that they're diminishing the numbers of woodland birds and woodland butterflies and all sorts of things. And the reason for that is that they don't have any natural predators here. We did away with those natural predators hundreds of years ago. So it's not surprising, if you know anything about ecology, that the prey population will continue to grow unabated. And this leaves us in a very difficult position. Because if we want to maintain a rich mosaic of habitats supporting woodland butterflies and woodland birds, then we can't have as many deer, which means we have to go out and cull them. Otherwise, we just get overbrowsed. In Berlin, there are 19 pairs breeding in the city centre. And they eat squirrels, albeit red squirrels, and they eat pigeons, and they coexist in those urban environments with humans. In the UK, our goshawks are hemmed in to those areas where they can carry on breeding without persecution, but the minute the young leave, they just get shot, trapped, and poisoned. And of course, the paragon, if you'll forgive the pun, of all of this persecution is probably this bird, the hen harrier. We're fortunate you've still got quite a few hen harriers, but you're not very fortunate if they fly across the mainland, because then when they drift around, they don't last very long. And again, in England, we don't have figures for Northern Ireland, I'm afraid, but in England, we know that we should have more than 300 pairs of these birds breeding. That's the amount of habitat that's available for them. But we've got, somewhere between 5 and 20, depending on how things go each year. And this is because of ruthless persecution. Ditto the golden eagle. And when it comes to icons in the UK, it's right up there. I mean, this is our T-shirt animal. And for many, it's an emblem of wilderness, wildness, of an ancient, craggy land where we've been unable to tame it, and this bird represents so much for us. In so many ways, I think it's one of those creatures that we need to know exists out there. It gives us some sense of hope that we haven't despoiled everything. And yet, these birds are regularly killed, principally on driven grouse moors. And there's no ambiguity about what I'm saying. This is not my opinion. We satellite track these birds now, and the technology is remarkable. We know exactly where they are, plus or minus a couple of metres, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We know whether they're sleeping, flying, eating. The information is significant. We equally know that a disproportionate number of them disappear on driven grouse moors. Their signals just stop. So it's difficult when here in the UK we are failing to protect our own iconic species. It's difficult to turn overseas and look at other species around the world which we hold in even higher regard, things like, say, the tiger, which we would describe as a masterpiece of nature. I've heard that description used. I would argue that everything that lives is a masterpiece, otherwise it wouldn't be living, but let's not go there. I understand what people mean. The magnificence of a tiger is undeniable, and again it embodies all of those things that we have a deep-rooted yearning for, a sense of the tiger burning bright in the jungle of the night. It's out there, it's mysterious, it's on the brink of our tangibility, it's wild, it's perfect. Except that there aren't that many tigers left, are there? So, in the space of just a century, due to habitat loss, hunting played a significant role, and persecution, they're down to about 3,200. And there's an argument about that, because they're really difficult to census. So there could be fewer tigers. So the question is, how are we going to look after them? What are we going to do to look after this masterpiece of nature? Well, to just throw some light on that in a fairly abstract way, stay with me for the next couple of minutes, because we're going to talk about other masterpieces. So this is Picasso. I'm massively into art. If you give me a day off, away from the poodles, then I'm going to go to an art gallery and start looking at paintings. Because for me that's another form of relaxation. I can lose myself in a painting almost instantaneously. It can take me out of the world that I'm in, into somewhere else where my imagination can run riot. So they're a portal for me to go. It was a skill that my mother taught me years ago. So I quite like Picasso. He's not my favourite artist. This is my favourite artist, Ivan Hitchens. He paints these abstract expressionist landscapes of southern England. These are my colours. These are the colours of my life. This is the structure of my life. And its simplification is tempting to me, and I like moving into his landscapes. You may not like the abstract, you may like the figurative. Here's John Constable. It's one of the most famous paintings in the world, the Hay Wain from Essex. And then there's Turner, of course, another great landscape painter that we have here. And we worship these works of art. We put them into galleries and they're hallowed, and we go there, we speak in hushed tones, and if anyone speaks loud, unfortunately we get loads of tourists who come in and stand right in front of the painting whilst you're looking at it. I've got a word for that, I can't use it on a Sunday afternoon. Whatever. These are what we call our national treasures. So how many national treasures are there around the world? Turner's. There are 2,000 Turner paintings, give or take. Picasso, wow, Picasso really, he was a busy bloke. He was painting, he was sculpting, he was doing ceramics, he was doing loads of lithographs and all sorts of things. So there's 50,000 Picassos out there. The really rare artists are things like Vermeer. There's only 34 known Vermeers. There's argument about others, of course. And then, of course, Leonardo. Further ago, difficult to prove the provenance, that we think there were 15. And we know that because of the rarity of these artworks and their extraordinary beauty, that we afford them massive value. So let's jump back to one of my favourites. I like Jackson Pollock a lot. Would I spend £162 million on number 17, the picture I've just shown you? That's what we have spent on it. Someone's put their hands in their pocket and spent £162 million on that. It's not a record. Cézanne here, this is the card plays. This one went for £278 million. One of Cézanne's paintings. And I mentioned Leonardo was a very rare artist. Most of those pieces are in, public collections. Very few now left in private hands. This one went to auction a couple of years ago, and as a consequence of that, it sold for £352 million. And 52 million, which is a lot of money. Here's nature's greatest masterpiece. How many of these are there? Well, that's Siberian tiger. So out of that population of potentially 3,200, there are 500 of these, and they are really imperiled because they're living in a remote part of the world which is bordered with China, where most of the trafficked tiger parts end up. That's where they're of greatest value. So just as an exercise, a crude and a vulgar exercise, let's just see how much a Siberian tiger might be worth in dollars, contrasting it with our greatest masterpieces. Firstly, numerically. Well, if there are 500 Siberian tigers, the artist that is most well known and most valuable is Gauguin. He painted about, give or take 500 of his paintings, and they sell for on average £155 million. What are we going to do about looking after our tigers, and how much is it going to cost? Well, there are lots of tiger charities working, but the Global Tiger Recovery Programme is the body which is trying to oversee looking after these animals. And they need 350 million for the first 5 years. So that's one Cézanne with 10 million in change. Just to put it in perspective. 500 Siberian tigers. We could look after those for the price of one Cézanne painting, and we still have 10 million left over to fritter away on pandas or something. If we got that money, the $350 million, they reckon, and they are quite a credible bunch of people, this lot, that we could stabilise those tiger populations, and by 2022 we could have more than 7,000 tigers, which would be a significant improvement for the price of one Cézanne painting. But there is a problem, because at the moment, the vast majority of our tigers live in India. And India has an enormously rapidly growing population. At the moment, there are 1.3 billion people in India. Now, I've got this map off the internet. It's not a map that I've drawn. It was drawn by an Indian person. So the comments on it are not my own. But what it serves to show is that this is a complex country socially, where you've got extremes of wealth and poverty and an enormous agricultural burden on that landscape to feed all of those people. Therefore, the pressures on its natural resources are phenomenal. Add mining and other forms of exploitation, and this is a tricky place for tigers to live. And it will be, because in the space of that project, in the 5 years that they're saying, the population would have risen to 1.4 billion people. How are all of those tigers going to get along in the world when globally at that point there are 8 billion humans? It's a big ask, because we can't even get along with foxes. And yet we expect people over there to get along with tigers from our comfy armchairs. We are surviving on the resource poverty of the world's poor. And that inequality is the only thing that's keeping our planet alive at this point in time. And is there anyone in here who thinks that's fair? Is there anyone here who thinks we're not going to be found out? No. For a long time, I had a closer relationship with animals than humans. I mean, I got on with my family mainly. Got some of my friends, I quite like them, they're okay. But I didn't have a great regard for humans because of the way that we act and the damage that we do. It's quite a simplistic view, but it's the way it is. And what's their attitude? Well, they don't want our crisis to exist, because if they did, they'd have to change. And they don't want to change because at the moment, everything is serving what they need at this point in time. So we can't really trust them at all. And the other thing is that they're trying to distract us all the time from this bigger, most important issue. The thing that's affecting the whole planet and every human that lives on it and everything else that lives on it. Not black people, white people, yellow people, Christians, Muslims, or anything else. Just one species. And they distract us with war, crime, jobs, but principally, of course, it's money, money, money. It's money in the short term. It's all about growth. It's about quality of life. But you see, I pick up my mobile phone and I look at it and I think, that's amazing. It connects me with the world. It can tell me anything I want to know instantaneously. I mean, it's like, remember when we were watching Star Trek in the 70s? I mean, it's better than Star Trek, isn't it, if you've got an iPhone, But it costs about 600 quid or something, doesn't it? Wait, that's how much
pounds it costs. It costs a lot more to the environment, all the metals that are in it, all the miserable mining conditions in West Africa, all the leaching from the mine that's polluting the environment, all the poor women sold into slavery to service the mine workers, everything else you don't see written on the Apple box. But the big question is, does my iPhone make me happy? No. In fact, it makes me miserable most of the time. Have a look at my Twitter timeline. That's pretty miserable. Quite a lot of the time. Not always, to be fair, but quite a lot of the time. I've got a mass of emails. Every 5 minutes, if I'm not doing something, I've got to be doing that. It doesn't make me happy at all. Do you know what makes me happy? What makes me happy is getting up and running through that wood with my dogs. That's what makes me happy. Not my iPhone. Not my flat screen TV. Not my electric car. And I think that we've forgotten what really makes us happy because we've been bought into this whole money, money, money thing. Grow, 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 better, better, better. But it isn't really better. It's not better for our mental health. It's not better for our kids' health. And I really have a profound worry about our contemporary leaders. Cast your mind back into recent history. These men, or men, led to the deaths of millions and millions of people. And we had to essentially and physically fight their ideologies and ideas in order to survive. And I'm a pacifist, not a warmonger. But I can tell you that the fear of those ideologies and ideas was enough to motivate us very, very quickly. And this is a remarkable fact. When people say that we can't have the capacity to change what we do when it comes to the climate, look at this. But before Pearl Harbor in December of 41, they were making 3 million cars in the United States a year. After that day, the Japanese attacked Hawaii. They made 139 for the rest of the war. The American nation turned on a sixpence and said, we've got a problem, we're going to deal with it. I'm not saying that fighting the Japanese, not promoting war. I'm just saying that fear turned an entire nation on a sixpence. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty frightened now. That period of conflict generated enormous and rapid advances in technology, radio, rockets, nuclear power, computers, synthetic oils. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, yeah, but they're all destructive things. They only invented those because they want to kill more people. But the iPhone is a computer. When the conflict was finished, we turned those things to productive advantage, and even during the course of the war, we came up with this. Does anyone know what this is? This has saved the lives of many of you in here. It saved my life. Undoubtedly, 58 years old. I wouldn't be if it weren't for this. This is penicillin. And during the Second World War, we came up with that. Anti-malarials, immunisation, tetanus in particular, all sorts of things that would extend human life. That period of fear drove us to enormous capacities for change. We are the most adaptable, intelligent and resourceful species this planet has ever seen. We can do it. We can overcome famine, pestilence, disease and war, and thrive and prosper. There is no doubt at all that we don't have the capacity to deal with our climate and environment emergency. The problem is that bunch of politicians I just showed you, because they're not moving with that urgency that's required to address this issue. So I see there's only one solution, and that is that we do it ourselves, that we all empower ourselves to make a difference. And it's easy to feel small. It's easy to think that this is such a big problem that we can't possibly have an impact. Well, we're part of the problem. We're having an impact on the forest in Indonesia. So ultimately, we didn't already palm oil. Don't slow that down. I think that we have an enormous capacity as individuals to make a difference. And I think that we can integrate into our own lives many small things. We can afford to do it, whereas in many other parts of the world they can't afford to do it. I can afford to be vegan. You can't afford to be vegan if you're a sub-Saharan African child. You die. But I can make that choice. I'm fortunate in that I can afford an electric car. I exchange a couple of others to get it, because they're still too expensive. But I can make that choice. It's not a solution actually, but it's heading in the right direction. We're all fortunate here in that we can make choices in our lives if we understand that without the ability to change, we can't change the world. And therefore there is the onus upon us to make those changes. We've got to do it. And that empowerment, that doing it yourself, that deciding, okay, you don't have to be vegan. If you're eating meat 7 days a week, you can cut down to 5. If you eat it 3, you could cut down to 2, and then you might think about being vegetarian. You don't have to make that didactic leap from A to B. The word I like is transition. We've got to transition rapidly from A to B. But we have to be tolerant of people moving there. People are critical of me at the moment because I still fly. And I'm thinking about what I'm doing about that. I've cut down my flying considerably. I've cancelled flights and trips and all sorts of things. I've got my electric car. I've got my meter in the house. I now get my fuel, my energy from a green and sustainable supply of electricity. I'm about to switch to an ethical bank because I've noticed that my bank is investing money in fossil fuels in the weapons industry. I don't like it. All things I can do on my computer in 10 minutes. If we all do them, and they will all start to make a difference. Would they save the world? No. No, they're not going to save the world. But what they're going to do is tell us all as individuals that we have that capacity. And if we all as individuals have that capacity, then we will rise up and exercise our voices critically for change. And that's what we see Extinction Rebellion doing. That's what we see those brave kids with their Fridays for Future doing. They're standing up and shouting above the noise. That's our only hope. And our only real hope is if we do it tomorrow. So please, help. Thank you.